The year is 1303. You wake up to a day that seems like any other in a hard life. Today, you have grain which needs to be ground into flour. When you arrive at the miller, they ask if you are paying in gold coins. When you laugh, they look back at you with a serious stare. Later that day, you hear about school children finding gems in an open field. You listen as people say valuable items are showing up everywhere in London, like a shower of wealth from above. At this point, you realize this cannot be true. That is, until weeks later you find out it was all too real. When you find out to your shock that this year's national tax income was stolen, two thoughts enter your mind. First, with the country fighting a long, bitter war against the Scots, who will pay for it? Then, since you live in 1303 England, you know King Edward I is about to send the taxman to your door. Hello everyone, my name is Craig, host of Medieval to Modern, where we feature fascinating information from civilization's medieval ages. Thank you for joining us today. In the year 1303, King Edward I was based in York, occupied with a bloody war against the Scots and William Wallace. The last thing occupying his mind were administrative affairs. However, when strong word reached his ears about extravagant spending in London, his attention quickly changed. Word was spreading fast about London brothel owners receiving payment in gold florins. Silver plates and tableware embossed with the royal seal were caught by fishermen on the River Thames. Merchants were being compensated for their wares with valuable objects and more rare coinage. To his stunned ears, it seemed the streets of London were awash with instant wealth, though it took him only a moment to realize what had happened. These riches could only be from one source. When it was confirmed that his treasury had suffered from a large theft, he immediately set off with extreme anger back to London. As he left York, the severity of this new crisis hit him hard. The remainder of his treasury was held in Westminster Abbey. It was there, under locks and keys, that royal treasury which did not accompany him was kept safe and secure. These items included crown jewels, silver cups, gold florins, and other valuable royal family possessions. King Edward I had complete trust in the Benedictine monks at Westminster Abbey, where these priceless treasures were kept hidden in the Pyx chamber. To his mind, they were devoted, loyal, and a constant presence to keep watch over this great fortune. Finished with 13-foot thick walls, this chamber was thought to be the safest vault at the time in England. At this time, King Edward I was already fighting a costly military campaign which drained his kingdom's coffers. He knew this was fact because the majority of his royal treasury accompanied him under armed guard. He could not afford any unexpected financial losses. Now, the king knew his financial situation was becoming a major threat to the kingdom. Nevertheless, as ruler, he viewed this war as crucial to the future success of England. He already pursued an aggressive tax policy to finance this campaign and was committed to do more for victory against the Scots. Wars are costly affairs, and the king constantly required fresh funds to pay for it. However, one of the targets of his heavy tax policy was the church, and they were already stretched to the financial limit, though the latest demand from the monarch, a shockingly steep increase for tribute, would be very hard to meet. King Edward I, who was nicknamed Edward Longshanks, could not stop grasping for every coin his subjects owned. Among the king's subjects was a man who gave all of his money and some of his time to the king. Richard of Pudlicott was a former wool merchant from Oxfordshire. In his past, he had been imprisoned in Flanders as guarantor for some of Edward I's debts. On top of this punishment, they forced him to pay 14 pounds of the royal debt, a handsome sum in today's currency. When he attempted to receive compensation from the king for his loss, he was denied. Now, broke and desperate for funds to pay off debts, he needed money fast. During his claim for compensation, Richard of Pudlicott had visited Westminster Abbey. While in the vicinity of the abbey, he heard growing dissatisfaction with the king's taxes and unpaid debts. He decided to use the growing anger to his advantage, setting up as a merchant nearby. With his charm and good talk, he formed a bond with two important people at the abbey, John Shench and William of the Palace. Since he was known as a regular merchant, he often walked the abbey grounds unsupervised. Then, after gaining increasing trust, one of the monks at the abbey talked about its secret treasury with him. It was during this time he also witnessed the great wealth contained at the abbey, vowing to take it all for himself. The desperate Richard of Pudlicott then began devising his plan for theft and revenge on the king. When King Edward I arrived in London, he met his worst nightmare. The royal treasury at Westminster Abbey was estimated to be worth £100,000. This was an extraordinary amount, equaling 1 year's tax revenue for his kingdom. Unfortunately for the king, it was gone. After a period of time had lapsed, on June 6, 1303, the monarch commenced an investigation. It would last many months. In his rage, he cast a wide net for conspirators, including the known frequent visitor of the abbey, Richard of Pudlicott. He was arrested on June 25th, along with William at the palace. During this investigation, 48 monks and 32 servants were also sent to the Tower of London. By the time this trial began, only 10 monks and Richard of Pudlicott were facing charges. The rest of the monks and others had been freed. At the trial, all were eager to hear how this huge theft was carried out. Sworn testimony from witnesses provided one version of events. Witnesses that were in the vicinity of Westminster Abbey at the time gave the following testimony. They said the accused and a large number of accomplices took the treasure outside from the center of the abbey. Skilled craftsmen were also brought in, since it was difficult to access the crypt. Adding to the difficulty, the crypt had a trap within, which only a person or persons that had been inside could know about. The sheer size of items taken needed lay people and clergy alike to carry out the deed without opposition, which meant this was either a grand conspiracy or one of the greatest instances of negligence ever imaginable. However, Richard of Pudlicott had his own version of events, which was even more shocking. He decided on a martyr's defense, claiming to have acted completely alone without the aid of any other person. As for gaining information on the treasure and access, that too, he said, came from his planned visits to the abbey. He confessed to taking over 90 days during the winter months to dig alone underneath the grounds of Westminster Abbey. He finished this massive task in the days following Easter. Richard of Pudlicott claimed a prior small-scale robbery of silverware at the abbey gave him knowledge on how to proceed with this much larger theft. Once inside the crypt on April the 24th, he said it took him a day to ponder which valuables to rob. With so much to carry, he then claimed to have hidden on abbey grounds what he could not take away first, retrieving those goods the following evening. By the morning of April the 26th, the deed was done. Once again, he said this was all conducted by himself. Who was the trial to believe? Well, Richard of Pudlicott would be punished. He was eventually found guilty of the crime. On November the 28th, 1305, he was taken from imprisonment in the Tower of London and hung in Tothill Lane on the abbot's gallows, then flayed. Despite his testimony, it was too much for the trial to believe he acted alone. William of the Palace was hung back in March of 1304, along with 5 lay people. Contrary to a popular myth, the skin of Richard of Pudlicott was not nailed to the door of Westminster Abbey. In a 2005 study, it was determined that fragments found on the remaining iron door strap were from an animal skin, which at one time covered the door. In the months following this massive theft, the royal treasury was relocated to the Tower of London, while Westminster Abbey had its crypt made more secure. Then the treasury returned to the abbey. It is curious to note King Edward I continued to use Westminster Abbey and the crypt location to store his royal treasury. Eventually, King Edward I recovered most of the stolen royal treasury. Silverware and other items embossed with the royal seal were easily identified. Foreign gold coins were also easy to locate, as were royal gemstones. We should mention that not all of the royal treasury was recovered. The coronet of the last sovereign Prince of Wales, seized by King Edward I in 1284, was never found after 1303. It was kept at Westminster Abbey until the time of the Great Royal Heist. The coronet was not present during an inventory undertaken by Oliver Cromwell in 1649. Currently, it is on a list of missing treasures. Richard of Pudlicott was not the only person to suffer the king's refusal to honor his debts. In fact, King Edward I refused to pay numerous other debts. When this king passed away in 1307, he still owed a massive sum, estimated at £200,000. The majority of this debt was still owed 20 years later when his son's rule came to an end. The greatest royal heist in history amounted to 1 year's worth of tax receipts from the royal treasury. For comparison purposes, the British government took in revenue of over £718 billion in the year 2021. Even the most conservative estimates put the 1303 haul at over £30 billion today. If you believe Richard of Pudlicott's confession that he had acted alone, no one person has ever stolen this amount of money equivalent at one time. Even with accomplices, this figure will be extremely difficult to steal at one time. Which brings us to that time at which we will share the Medieval to Modern top 8 of intriguing facts about the great royal heist of Richard of Pudlicott. As our viewers know, we believe knowledge is ageless as well as enjoyable. Now, we shall present them all for your learning pleasure. Number 1. Richard of Pudlicott still possessed £2,000 of stolen property at the time of his arrest, a vast sum at the time. Number 2. The Westminster Abbey door, examined for human skin in 2005, is the oldest known door in England. Number 3. Surprisingly, Richard of Pudlicott did serve time as a clerk in his past, though he left the clergy. Number 4. At this time in English history, the Treasury was referred to as the King's Wardrobe, an official office of government dealing with financial matters. The term came from the clothes closet of the king. Number 5. The Picts Chamber at Westminster Abbey has existed since 1070. Number 6. If the tax revenue of the United States government for 2021 were taken, it would amount to over $4 trillion. Number 7. The trial for Richard of Pudlicott was one of the largest in England during the High Medieval period, which was between 1000 AD and the 1300s AD. Number 8. Even the Abbot of Westminster, or head of the abbey, was arrested for this theft, but was later released. Thank you for supporting us at Medieval to Modern. Please be sure to watch our next episode, or one shown at the end of this video. Also, be sure to like, subscribe, comment, and spread the word about this channel so we can create more exciting content. I wish you good tidings as we remember that sharing knowledge has been a noble deed throughout the ages.